to welcome you all back to the second semester. I hope you all had a wonderful break and you're energized and ready to rock and roll in the semester and kind of take off and take advantage of everything that you're doing. I think that college education is the most remarkable time in your life. It is a time when you really are making this transition from what you've learned in your homes and what you've learned growing up in high school and such, and then ultimately who you're going to be as an adult, and what you're going to launch in terms of your careers. And so we spend a lot of time in education thinking about how to help you all do that the best that you can do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means from the perspective of what kind of business school we want to be in. In doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own history and my own life and how I got here. And I also want to talk a little bit about what the school is about and where it's going. You probably know a good amount because you chose this place, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what the exciting future brings. And throughout that, I want to also give a message that's really fundamentally about the fact that you own this time. This is your moment to actually take advantage and take control of your education and take control of all of the opportunities you have in front of you that are going to launch you into the next phase of your life. I know college is fun and there's lots of opportunity to do lots of fun things and you should have those sorts of social experiences, but this is also your moment to prepare for what is a very, very competitive labor market in a time that's frankly very, very tenuous and difficult for the U.S. economy. It's not just tenuous and difficult because of the current financial crisis, it's tenuous and difficult because we are living in a world that is so complex globally. And frankly, the United States is falling behind a little bit in terms of what our mindset is for how to be integrated into that global system. So what I want to do right now is just take a little time and talk you through some of these issues as we think about them with respect to the school, as where the school's going, and weave through this thread of who I am and where I've come into this system. So let me just tell you a quick story about how somebody who has no formal business training in terms of an MBA degree or even a BBA degree ends up being the dean of a business school. This has been an interesting story for me in terms of how my life has evolved, and it was a little bit unexpected that I ended up here because, frankly, if you would have asked me 2 years ago if this is what I'd be doing, I wouldn't have known. However, there is no job that I'd rather be doing right now at this point in my life, and there's no more exciting project than thinking deeply about how to launch the revolution of the next phase of business education. So how did I get here? About 25 years ago, maybe some more now, I was an undergraduate student, very much in your situation, your position at the University of Chicago. I knew I wanted to study economics and some aspect of the social sciences because I wanted to understand the global economy that was opening up. But I also thought, how could I use my college career to do something that I could never be able to do on my own? And that's the first lesson that I think is really important to think about and to imagine in terms of you charting out your career. People often come to me and say, Dean Guthrie, should I double major in finance and economics or finance and accounting? And I'll say, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to get a job at Goldman Sachs. Okay, that's interesting. That's a good aspiration. But the truth is you shouldn't do either of those things. What you should do is have an interesting time. Take yourself deep into some area of the world that you could not master on your own. Master something that you just can't pick up a book and figure out for yourself. Become an interesting person that an interviewer is going to remember. So when I thought about that when I was 19 years old, I thought, well, if I could just master some part of the world that I thought held the future. Now at the time I was very, very just sort of strategic about it. And it's an interesting thing, it put me in an interesting position later in my life because a lot of China scholars end up as China scholars because they've dreamed of China their whole lives. I didn't have that dream. But I did go around and talk to a number of faculty that said, you know, if this is what I want to do, and I want to have some kind of interesting career. Actually at the time I didn't even know that I was going to be an academic. I thought I'd be a business person and go into consulting or something. What area of the world should I spend the next 4 years mastering? I said, well, that thing going on in Russia. Maybe you should study Russian. Very interesting things happening there. Or Japanese. Japan is #1, the largest economy in the world. Maybe you should study Arabic. But the more I read about China at the time, the more it captured my imagination in terms of what was possible. It was the early stages of the economic reforms in China, and it didn't look like China was going to be as successful or as powerful as the Soviet Union was at the time. But I was captured in terms of what the ideas would be. So I immersed myself. And I studied Chinese language. I took a year off and went to live in Taiwan to study language more. Studied Chinese literature as much as I could. Did as much of the social sciences as I could as well, but it became clear to me that having this comparative advantage, knowing how to speak Chinese fluently, knowing the history and the culture, would make me a different kind of person. And then I decided to go get a PhD and thought about studying economics, but having come out of the University of Chicago, Chicago-style economics just didn't sit right with me. I thought there were too many problems with the assumptions that were being made. So I went to Berkeley and got a PhD in organizational sociology, became a professor at NYU, but still something wasn't sitting right with me. I wasn't doing what I felt was my calling. But the one class I loved teaching at NYU was a class like this. It had about 400 students in it a semester. And it was a class on the Chinese economy. And my favorite students were the business students. I just, for some reason, enjoyed interacting with young minds who were going to go out and shake the world up. And I know how business school students think. They were planning to also get rich in doing it. But they were going to go out and change things. Because make no mistake about it, business is one of the most powerful forces for change. It can be good or bad, but it is one of the most powerful forces in a capitalist economy and in the globalist economy today. There is nothing besides nation states as an institution that rival the power of corporations. So it becomes a very, very heady and interesting conversation to talk to young minds about what's happening in a place like China. Eventually I realized that I probably should just be a business school professor because I like that better, and ended up in the Stern School of Business. But I still had a different vision of what business school education should be. And that's kind of where this story takes us into, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes and let me talk about this particular school. Because I think it's a very important thing to know where we are as an economy, what we're thinking of in terms of the future of the economy, and what you all are a part of in choosing to come to the George Washington School of Business. This man, probably at your age, he's not so prominent in your minds. He passed away a couple of years ago, but in my mind, this is the most influential economist of the 20th century. We are still living in Milton Friedman's world, for better or for worse. I happen to think it's for worse, but some people would contest that. But the reason is this. There was a very steady evolution over the course of the 20th century that had fundamental consequences for what the stage of capitalism and the version of capitalism that we live in became. We used to, in the middle of the 20th century, live in a world that was much more of what John Maynard Keynes had imagined it should be, and that was somewhat of what we might think of as a mixed economy. Milton Friedman was, in the 1960s, regarded at the University of Chicago as sort of a crackpot economist, very talented mathematician, but very extreme in terms of his views of market efficiency theory. But slowly over the course of time, aided by some historical trends that were going on in the United States, some of which happened in the 1970s, which included stagflation and the oil shocks, the view that unions had become a little bit too powerful. Milton Friedman's voice caught fire. It caught the imagination of a generation of business leaders. And steadily over the course of the 1970s, he went from being a highly regarded mathematician who was also not widely accepted as an economic thinker to being a truly public figure. By 1979, when he and his wife published a book called Free to Choose, sold millions of copies worldwide. A television show was made about them. It's actually very funny to see this old guy who's, he and his wife would come out onto this television set and talk about markets. Wasn't the kind of rock star you would imagine, but he was a rock star. He was. And it was in his mind, in his vision, that the 1980s and 1990s and 2000s were constructed as an economic era. It was a period in which business schools followed neoclassical economic theory as removing themselves more and more, becoming more and more what I like to think of as disembedded. Market efficiency theory tells us The market is a self-correcting mechanism. You can just leave it alone and it will work. It is the best mechanism for understanding social structures and social organization that we know. Now, I often joke, although it may be true actually, that even Milton Friedman, brilliant as he was and Nobel laureate that he was, my guess is that he only read the first 15 pages of Adam Smith because he got to the invisible hand quote and then put the book down. Because Adam Smith would never have constructed a market or a system the way they were constructed over the course of the 1980s and 1990s. So if you get a chance to read all of The Wealth of Nations, if you haven't already, you should. But most economists misquote Smith, I think, in some very fundamental ways, because that is it's a very, very dangerous thing to think that markets can be disembedded from society, and it's therefore very dangerous for business schools to teach business that way. Now, there's a different way of thinking. This guy is surely someone that nobody would recognize, but he's actually a very powerful figure in the field of economic sociology. His name's Mark Granovetter, and he came up with this concept of embeddedness. And the basic argument is that we are all embedded in social worlds. People are human, social, cultural, political animals, and this is the world that we live in. And we have to then understand that the way we train business leaders, the way we train students to go out into the world, has to reflect that reality. If we think that we can just arm people with powerful instruments like derivatives or the knowledge of how to build mortgage-backed securities, but not give them the in-depth understanding of what it means to be embedded in a social system, and therefore understand the social consequences of their actions, eventually you'll get some kind of crisis like we've seen in 2008, 2009 that we're still reeling from today. You will also get a system in which people will think that you don't need to deeply understand the societies in which businesses are operating. It's easy enough to sort of just think about flows of capital. You don't need to deeply understand China in order to do business in China. We know that market efficiency theory works. This is a dangerous way of thinking, and we will fall behind because of it, and we are. So I had a dream. I never dreamed that I'd be leading a business school, but I had a dream about building that kind of business school. My former institution, I was sort of I was probably crackpot character that Milton Friedman was regarded as being. People thought, he's a good teacher, a good researcher, but he's really out there, right? And then eventually, when I kept saying we're to blame for the financial crisis, they kept saying, why don't you go somewhere else? So I came here. Because this is what we used to build our entire business school system around. This entire concept was so dominant in how we thought of education. And this is just not enough. Just thinking about financial markets primarily, or just thinking about disembedded systems will not allow us to create a safe kind of system. So what kind of system should we have? We should be teaching business leaders to understand the world from a perspective of, first, acknowledging, appreciating, enjoying how powerful business is as an institution for change. It is a source of innovation. It is a source of wealth creation. It is a source of imagination. But it is also a system that must be understood as influencing everything that we do, and therefore embedded in society in some fundamental way. So actually thinking about teaching that way, to me, is a great passion. I love that model. I love that idea. And it's actually what I like to talk about it as a revolution or a social movement or something, but it is something that is happening. There is more and more acceptance for this way of thinking today, and there's more and more appreciation for it being the cutting-edge way of thinking. But if we were going to build such a business school, where would we do it? We would want to do it 6 blocks from the White House, and across the street from the IMF, and the World Bank, and the IFC, and the State Department. We would want to do it in a place that is, interestingly, somewhat of a small town in terms of how it worked, but it is prominent enough to be the nation's capital. And that is that we occupy that real estate. We occupy this moment of doing this, and you all are a part of it. You will be here for the next 4 years being a part of this transformation, and it is going to be fun. It's going to be hard work. You will work hard in all of your classes if Joelle has anything to say about it, but it will be fun. It will be be an amazing time. Now, there are 3 pillars that I like to think about, and they're not functional areas. Functional areas are important. You will learn your finance, you'll learn your accounting, you'll learn your marketing, management, leadership. But what I like to think about are the things that make us then distinctive underneath the pillars that support this tabletop of the intersection of business and society. And they are things like global and international, really deeply understanding what goes on in that space. There are things like sustainability and social responsibility, and leadership and ethics. You know, following the accounting crises of 2000, 2001, WorldCom, Enron, Tyco, a lot of business schools sort of worried about, well, should we be teaching ethics? Have we gone too far in disembedding our students and thinking that markets are self-correcting? And a lot of business school faculty said, no, ethics is not our business. That's not what we do, right? We teach economic decision-making, pure and simple. Individuals are rational profit maximizers. The markets will take care of the rest. There's only one business school that I know of in the last 10 years that stepped up and said, we are going to have ethics as a core curriculum course. And most recently for us, it's a wonderful gift that Tim Fort, our ethicist and a major figure in this field, is actually the interim undergraduate dean and is helping us think about the future of this program. But this is a special type of conversation and a special type of teaching that is going on. So that's what really I want to build as a business school. Now, I could talk about lots of our other initiatives, but I think what I'd like to do here is just round this out by saying, in order to train you this way, it means not only embedding ourselves in this university, right? So you may wonder, and some of you may complain, that why do I have to take 40% of my courses in CCAS? I came to the business school. I don't want arts and sciences. I want more space in my course to double and triple major in finance, economics, and accounting. I guarantee you it will be medicine that is good for you. You must expand your minds. This is the moment, this is the way to think deeply about how you will be interesting business leaders. It is the way. And follow your passion. Do whatever it is that gets you excited, but you must balance what you're doing as business people with how you understand social, cultural, political systems. And we have a wonderful university here for that. So to those students who come to me and say, should I double major in finance and economics or finance and accounting? I say, pick one of them and take classes at the Elliott School. Go out and study a language. Study music. Think about what you can actually do to follow that passion so that you can create a dynamic in which you understand the world a little better. And then when you balance that with good functional knowledge in key areas, I guarantee you, when you're sitting across the table from that recruiter, you'll have an interesting story to tell. And so I exhort you to love this moment, embrace it, be excited about it, follow Dr. Carter's advice on everything, and have fun. Thank you very much.